The rain came down in violent sheets, turning the narrow road into a river of mud and fallen leaves. Vivian Carter hunched over the steering wheel of her aging sedan, squinting through the windshield as the wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour. Her phone had died 20 minutes ago, taking her navigation app with it, and now she was driving blind through the wealthy hills outside the city with nothing but a handwritten address crumpled in her cup holder. She was already 40 minutes late for her appointment, and the client had specifically requested punctuality. This job could change everything for her small design firm. One successful project with a wealthy collector could lead to referrals, more work, maybe even the ability to hire an assistant. She couldn't afford to mess this up. The iron gate's thunder cracked overhead as Vivian spotted the gates through the storm. Massive iron structures rose from stone pillars, barely visible through curtains of rain and creeping ivy. She pulled close enough to read the numbers on the weathered plaque, her heart lifting with relief. This was it. Finally. The gates stood open, almost inviting, and she drove through without hesitation. The driveway curved through dark trees, their branches scratching at the sky like gnarled fingers. Then the mansion appeared, 3 stories of stone and glass, windows glowing amber through the storm. It looked more like a castle than a home, the kind of place where secrets lived in every shadow. Vivian killed the engine and grabbed her leather portfolio from the passenger seat. The cold hit her the moment she stepped out, rain soaking through her thin jacket within seconds. She ran toward the entrance, her heels slipping on wet stone, her dark hair plastering to her face. The open door. The front door stood ajar, warm light spilling onto the steps like an invitation. Vivian pushed it open wider, stepping into a foyer that stole her breath. Marble floors stretched in all directions, reflecting the glow of candles set in crystal holders along the walls. A grand staircase curved upward into shadow. The air smelled rich, like expensive wood and leather, and something smoky she couldn't name. Music drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, slow and sensual, the kind that made you feel like you were interrupting something private. Vivian hesitated, clutching her portfolio tighter, water dripping from her clothes onto the pristine floor. "Hello," she called out, her voice sounding small and uncertain. "I'm here for the design consultation." No response came, just the music and the distant rumble of thunder. She took a careful step forward, her wet shoes squeaking against the marble. Maybe the client was in another room. Maybe they couldn't hear her over the storm. The man in the shadows. The foyer opened into a sitting room dominated by a massive fireplace. Flames danced low in the hearth, casting moving shadows across walls lined with books and dark paintings. And there, standing by the fire with a glass of amber liquid in his hand, was a man who made the room feel suddenly smaller. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black shirt rolled to the elbows, dark slacks that probably cost more than her car payment. Even from across the room, Vivian could feel the weight of his presence, the way he commanded space without moving. When he turned to look at her, his eyes were the color of smoke, intense and unreadable. "You're late," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying an edge that made her stomach flip. Vivian blinked, trying to find her words. "I'm so sorry. The storm and my phone died, and I got turned around." He set his glass down on the mantel and moved toward her with deliberate steps, his gaze traveling over her soaked clothes, her dripping hair, the way she clutched her portfolio like a shield. A slow smile curved his lips, but it wasn't kind. It was knowing, dangerous, like he could see right through her. "You look like you swam here," he murmured, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the whiskey on his breath mixed with expensive cologne. The kiss that changed everything before Vivian could respond. Before she could even process what was happening, he moved. His hand cupped the back of her neck, fingers threading into her wet hair, and then his mouth was on hers, claiming her with a hunger that made her knees weak. Shock froze her in place. This wasn't right. This wasn't how design consultations went. But his lips were warm and demanding, tasting of whiskey and something darker, and her body responded before her mind could catch up. Her free hand fisted in his shirt, holding on as the room spun around her. The kiss deepened, his other hand sliding to her waist, pulling her flush against him. Heat exploded through her chest despite her wet clothes, despite the confusion screaming in the back of her mind. For one reckless moment, she kissed him back, drowning in sensation. Then reality crashed in like cold water. Vivian tore her mouth away, gasping, stumbling backward until her back hit the wall. Her portfolio fell from nerveless fingers, papers scattering across the floor. "What are you doing?" The words came out as a ragged whisper, her hand flying to her lips as if she could wipe away what just happened. The terrible truth confusion flickered across his face, his dark brows drawing together. "You're here for the evening. I assumed you'd want to get straight to it." "The evening?" Vivian's voice rose, hysteria creeping in at the edges. "I'm here for a design consultation." "Interior design." They stared at each other, comprehension dawning slowly, horribly. Before either could speak again, a door opened and an older man in a pristine suit entered, carrying a silver tray with champagne. "Sir," the man said in clipped tones, "the escort service just called. The woman you hired is stuck in traffic. She'll be another hour at least." The words landed like a physical blow. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face as understanding crashed over her. Escort. He thought she was an escort. That kiss, that assumption, everything suddenly made sick, horrible sense. "Oh my God," she breathed, her eyes burning with humiliation and rage. "You thought I was here to... that I was... Wait." The man, Julian, she would later learn his name was Julian Steele, raised his hands, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. "I didn't know. The door was open. You came in looking like... I thought..." The flight into the storm. Vivian didn't wait to hear more. She dropped to her knees, gathering papers with shaking hands, shoving them back into her portfolio without looking. Some of her sketches were water-damaged, others crumpled, but she didn't care. She just needed to leave, to get out of this nightmare before she fell completely apart. "Please let me explain," Julian said, his voice urgent now, stripped of that earlier confidence. He moved toward her, but she flinched away. "Don't touch me!" she spat, climbing to her feet. "Don't you dare touch me again." She turned and ran for the door, her portfolio clutched to her chest, papers still fluttering behind her. The rain hit her like a wall when she burst outside, but it felt cleansing, washing away the heat of his touch. The taste of his mouth. Behind her, she heard him call out, but his words were lost in the storm. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she might see something in his face that would make this even worse, might feel something other than the righteous anger burning in her chest. What was left behind? Vivian reached her car and threw herself inside, hands fumbling with keys as tears mixed with rain on her face. The engine sputtered to life and she peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying, not caring about the reckless speed or the slick roads. In the mansion, Julian stood frozen in the doorway, rain soaking his expensive shirt, watching her taillights disappear into the storm. The butler hovered uncertainly behind him, still holding the champagne tray. On the floor, half hidden beneath a chair, lay a leather-bound sketchbook. Its cover was embossed with silver lettering, Vivian Carter, Carter Designs. Julian bent and picked it up with careful hands, opening to find pages filled with drawings that made his chest tighten. Sunlit rooms, cozy corners, spaces that felt like home in ways his mansion never had. He stood there holding her forgotten work, the rain pounding the roof, and knew with absolute certainty that this woman had just walked out of his life before he'd even known he needed her in it. Julian didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Vivian's face, the way shock had turned to horror, then fury, the way she'd looked at him like he was something dirty, something shameful. He deserved it. Every bit of her disgust, every ounce of her anger. He sat in his study as dawn crept through the windows, her sketchbook open on the desk before him. Each page revealed something new about the woman he'd kissed and insulted in the same breath. A rooftop garden sketched with such detail he could almost smell the herbs growing in terracotta pots. A tiny apartment transformed into something magical with clever use of mirrors and light. Notes in the margins, written in flowing script, make small spaces feel infinite and every room should tell a story. His finger traced the edge of a drawing, A bedroom with gauzy curtains and morning light streaming across rumpled sheets. It felt intimate, like he was glimpsing into her dreams. In the corner, she'd written a single word: sanctuary. Julian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. His entire mansion was filled with expensive things, art pieces worth fortunes, furniture from European estates. But looking at her sketches, he realized his home had never been a sanctuary. It was a fortress, cold and imposing, built to impress rather than comfort. The search begins by 8 in the morning. Julian had showered, dressed in a charcoal suit that felt too formal for what he needed to do, and slid into the back of his car with Vivian's sketchbook under his arm. His driver, Thomas, gave him a questioning look in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Carter Designs, Julian said, reading the address from inside the sketchbook's cover. It's downtown near the Arts District. The drive took 30 minutes through morning traffic. Julian watched the city wake up around him, people hurrying to work with coffee cups and briefcases, living lives that suddenly seemed simpler than his own. He'd built an empire through ruthless decisions and calculated risks, but none of that prepared him for apologizing to a woman whose world he'd shattered with one terrible assumption. The storefront was wedged between a bakery and a vintage bookshop, its window display featuring fabric swatches and architectural drawings. The sign above the door read Carter Designs in elegant script, but the lights were off, the space clearly empty. The coffee shop confrontation. Thomas pointed across the street. "Sir, there's someone matching your description at the cafe." Julian's heart kicked against his ribs. Through the large windows of the coffee shop, he could see her. Vivian sat at a corner table, her dark hair pulled into a messy knot, wearing an oversized sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable. She hunched over a sketch pad, her pencil moving in angry, aggressive strokes. He crossed the street before he could talk himself out of it, the sketchbook clutched in one hand. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, but she didn't look up. The cafe smelled like espresso and fresh bread, morning sunlight streaming through the windows, but Julian only saw her. He approached slowly, stopping at the edge of her table. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set in a hard line. She'd spent the night as sleepless as he had, face to face again. "Let me explain," Julian said, his voice rougher than he intended. Vivian's pencil stopped mid-stroke. She looked up slowly, her gray eyes meeting his, and the coldness there hit him harder than any slap. She said nothing, just waited, and somehow her silence was worse than if she'd yelled. "You kissed me before I could even speak," she said finally, her voice low but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "Before I could tell you who I was or why I was there. What exactly is there to explain?" Julian set her sketchbook on the table between them, handling it like the precious thing it was. "That I made a terrible mistake. That I've spent all night thinking about it. About you." Her gaze dropped to the sketchbook, recognition flashing across her face, followed immediately by fresh anger. "You went through my private work?" "I picked it up after you left it behind," he said, not looking away from her eyes. "And yes, I looked through it. I couldn't not. Your drawings are incredible." The bitter truth Vivian leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest. The sweater slipped off one shoulder, revealing a faint bruise where her bag strap had dug in during her panicked flight. "So you stalked me to a coffee shop at 8 in the morning to return my property and tell me I'm talented? Is this how wealthy men apologize for treating women like purchased goods?" The words struck true, and Julian felt something crack in his chest. "I don't know how to apologize for this." "There's no guidebook for what I did. Try starting with, 'I'm sorry I assumed you were a prostitute and kissed you without consent.'" Vivian shot back, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and glanced around the cafe. The other customers were carefully not watching, but Julian could feel their awareness, their curiosity. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without invitation. "I'm sorry. Truly deeply sorry. I was expecting someone else, and when you walked in looking lost and vulnerable, I made an unforgivable assumption. Because women don't just walk into your mansion for legitimate reasons." Her eyebrow arched. "We must all be there for your entertainment?" breaking through the walls. Because I live in a world where almost everything is transactional, Julian said quietly. Where people want things from me, money or connections or favors. I've become so used to that reality that I forgot not everyone operates that way. Vivian's expression flickered, something softening for just a moment before hardening again. That's sad, but it doesn't excuse what you did. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the exhaustion of the sleepless night catching up with him. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking you to let me make it right, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. How exactly do you plan to do that? You can't unkiss me. You can't erase the humiliation. No, Julian agreed. But I can offer you something real. The consultation you came for last night. I need someone to redesign my home, and after seeing your work, I know you're exactly who I need. The unexpected offer. Vivian stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You cannot be serious. Completely serious. Name your price. I'll double whatever you were going to charge the client you were supposed to meet last night. Triple it. You think you can just throw money at this and make it go away? Her cheeks flushed with anger, making her eyes seem brighter. You think I'd want to spend time in that house with you after what happened? I think, Julian said carefully, that you're an incredibly talented designer who deserves to be compensated for the work you lost because of my mistake. I think you came to that house because you needed the job, and I took that opportunity away from you. She was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup. Julian watched emotions play across her face, anger warring with something else, something he couldn't quite read. I did need that job, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. My business is struggling. I've been working out of that tiny storefront for 2 years, taking whatever projects I can get. Last month I could barely make rent. The dangerous proposition. Julian leaned forward, seeing his opening. So let me help. Not because I think money solves everything, but because I genuinely believe you could transform that mausoleum I live in into something beautiful, something that feels like an actual home. You're asking me to trust you after what you did. I'm asking you to trust yourself, he corrected. To trust your talent and your vision. I'll give you complete creative control. Whatever you want to do, however you want to do it. I won't interfere. Vivian picked up her coffee, took a long sip, her eyes never leaving his face. He could see her thinking, calculating, weighing her pride against her practical needs. Why does it matter so much to you? You could hire any designer in the city. Because your drawings show spaces filled with light and warmth and life, Julian said honestly. Everything my home isn't. And because I need to prove to you, and maybe to myself, that I'm not just the man who made that terrible mistake last night. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility and risk. Outside, people walked past the window, oblivious to the negotiation happening inside. The delicate dance of apology and acceptance. The tentative agreement. If I agree to this, Vivian said slowly, there are conditions. Strict conditions. Name them. You never touch me again without explicit permission. You treat me with absolute professionalism. And at the first sign that you think this is anything other than a business arrangement, I walk away with full payment for work completed. No questions, no arguments. Julian nodded, relief flooding through him, even as something else twisted in his chest. Disappointment he had no right to feel. Agreed. Anything else? She pulled her sketchbook across the table, hugging it to her chest like armor. I want to start with the sitting room, the place where it happened. I want to transform it completely so neither of us ever has to remember that night when we walk into that space. Done, Julian said immediately. When can you start? Vivian looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the war still raging behind her eyes, pride and anger and hurt battling against opportunity and hope. Finally, she sighed. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp, and bring coffee. Good coffee, not whatever you probably have in that mansion. A smile tugged at Julian's lips, the first genuine one since the disaster began. I'll bring the best coffee in the city. You better, she said, but there was the faintest hint of warmth creeping into her voice. Because I'm going to make you watch me tear that entire room apart before we rebuild it. Vivian arrived at the mansion at exactly 9 o'clock, her portfolio case in one hand and a determined expression on her face. The iron gate stood open in the morning light, and the house looked different without the storm, less like a Gothic castle and more like a beautiful prison. Julian was waiting on the front steps, 2 cups of steaming coffee from the most expensive cafe in the city balanced in a carrier. "Good morning," he said, offering her one of the cups. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Vivian pulled back quickly, but not before feeling that same jolt of electricity from 2 nights ago. "Let's get to work," she said, ignoring the flutter in her stomach. She walked past him into the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble with purpose. She was here to do a job, nothing more. The sitting room felt smaller in daylight, less mysterious and more obviously masculine. Dark leather furniture, heavy drapes blocking most of the natural light, paintings of hunting scenes on the walls. It felt like a room designed to intimidate, not welcome. "Tell me about this space," Vivian said, pulling out her measuring tape. "What do you actually use it for?" Julian leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "Honestly, I don't. I just walk through it to get to other rooms." That's what I thought. She made notes on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "You have this beautiful room with huge windows facing east, perfect morning light, and you've blocked it all out. Why?" Layers of the past. He was quiet for a moment, and when Vivian looked up, she saw something raw in his expression. "My father decorated this room. After he died, I kept everything exactly as it was." Like a museum to his memory, Vivian's irritation softened slightly. She understood holding on to the past, even when it hurt. "What was he like?" "Demanding, brilliant, cold." Julian moved into the room, trailing his fingers along the back of a leather chair. "He built our family business from nothing, but he never learned how to just live. Everything was about success, about proving something. And you inherited that," Vivian said softly. "It wasn't a question. I inherited everything," Julian replied. "The business, the house, the belief that relationships are transactions, that people can be ordered and scheduled like appointments." The confession hung between them, heavy with meaning. Vivian set down her measuring tape and really looked at him. In the morning light, she could see the exhaustion still etched around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a world he never asked for, breaking down walls. "Tell me what you actually want," Vivian said, crossing her arms. "Not what your father would have wanted, not what impresses clients or business partners. What would make you happy to come home to?" Julian looked startled by the question, as if no one had ever asked him that before. He walked to the windows, pulling back one of the heavy drapes. Sunlight flooded in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "Light," he said finally. "I want light, and maybe something that doesn't feel like I'm living in a tomb." A smile tugged at Vivian's lips, despite herself. "I can work with that." Over the next 3 weeks, Vivian transformed the sitting room. She had the heavy drapes removed, replacing them with sheer linen curtains that filtered sunlight into something golden and warm. The dark furniture went into storage, replaced with pieces Vivian found at estate sales and antique markets, chairs and sofas in soft grays and blues that invited people to actually sit. She painted the walls a warm cream, hung mirrors to multiply the light, and brought in plants, real green things that made the space feel alive. Julian watched her work every day, bringing coffee in the mornings, sometimes lunch from whatever restaurant she mentioned craving. He asked questions about her choices, listened to her explain the psychology of color and space, and slowly, carefully, began to share pieces of himself. Discovering each other. "Why did you become a designer?" Julian asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the floor surrounded by fabric swatches, Vivian trying to decide between 2 shades of blue. "My mother," Vivian said, holding up samples to the light. "She was a housekeeper for wealthy families. I used to go with her sometimes after school, and I'd see these incredible homes, but they always felt empty, like nobody really lived there. I wanted to create spaces that felt full of life, even when nobody was home." "That's beautiful," Julian said quietly. Vivian glanced at him, surprised by the genuine emotion in his voice. "What about you? Did you always want to run your father's empire?" "I wanted to be an architect," he admitted. I used to draw buildings constantly, imagining structures that could change how people lived and worked. But when my father got sick, there was no question what I had to do. That must have been hard. It was necessary, Julian said. But Vivian heard the grief underneath. Sometimes we don't get to choose our paths. She reached out without thinking, her hand covering his where it rested on the floor between them. Maybe not, but we can choose how we walk them. The moment everything changed. The touch lasted only a second before Vivian pulled back, but it shifted something fundamental between them. The air felt different, charged with possibility neither of them was quite ready to name. As the project progressed, they fell into an easy rhythm. Julian started taking afternoons off, something his assistant claimed he'd never done in 10 years of working for him. He'd sit in the room while Vivian worked, sometimes helping hang artwork or move furniture, sometimes just watching her create magic from ordinary things. "You hum when you work," he observed one day, his voice warm with amusement. Vivian froze, paintbrush in hand. "I do not." "You do. Old jazz standards, I think. My mother used to listen to those." She felt her cheeks heat. "I didn't realize." "I'll stop." "Don't," Julian said quickly. "I like it. It makes the house feel less lonely." Their eyes met across the room, and Vivian felt her carefully constructed walls crack just a little. She'd been so determined to keep this professional, to never forget that first terrible night. But watching Julian slowly come alive, seeing him smile more easily, hearing him laugh at her terrible jokes while they worked, it was becoming impossible to hold on to her anger. The finished room and new beginning, on the day they finished the sitting room, Vivian stood in the doorway with Julian beside her, both of them taking in the transformation. The space glowed with warmth, filled with comfortable furniture and personal touches, books and photographs and the kind of details that made a house a home. "It's perfect," Julian breathed. "It's everything I didn't know I needed." "It's just a room," Vivian said, but her voice was soft, pleased. "No." Julian turned to face her, his expression serious. "It's proof that broken things can be remade into something beautiful." Vivian's breath caught. They were standing close, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes, close enough to remember how his lips had felt against hers that stormy night. But this time was different. This time she knew him. "Julian," she whispered. And it was permission and question and hope all at once. He raised his hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" Not as a mistake this time, as a choice. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, that she should keep her distance, protect herself. But her heart, that foolish, hopeful thing, knew better. "Yes," she said. This kiss was nothing like the first. It was soft and questioning, full of apology and promise. Julian's lips moved against hers with reverence, like she was something precious, something worth cherishing. Vivian's hands slid up his chest to loop around his neck, pulling him closer, and felt him smile against her mouth. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that properly since the moment you ran out into the storm." "It was worth the wait," Vivian admitted, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "Though if you ever make assumptions about me again, I'll redesign your entire house in hot pink." Julian laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Noted. Though honestly, if you designed it, I'd probably love it anyway." Love that transforms. Over the following months, Vivian redesigned the entire mansion, room by room, transforming Julian's fortress into a home filled with light and laughter. But more importantly, she transformed the man himself. Julian learned to laugh freely, to take time for things that brought joy instead of just profit, to open his heart to someone who saw past his wealth, to the lonely man underneath. And Vivian discovered that love doesn't always arrive perfectly. Sometimes it stumbles in through the wrong door during a storm. Sometimes it starts with mistakes and misunderstandings. But when two people are willing to rebuild together, to create something new from broken pieces, that love becomes stronger than anything built on perfect foundations. They stood together in the newly finished library one evening, Julian's arms wrapped around Vivian from behind as they watched the sunset through floor-to-ceiling windows she'd insisted on installing. "Thank you," Julian murmured against her hair, "for seeing what this place could be. What I could be." Vivian leaned back into his embrace, feeling completely safe, completely home. "Thank you for giving me the chance to show you, even if it started with the worst kiss in history." "Second worst," Julian corrected, spinning her around to face him. "Because this one is going to be perfect." And it was.